since we've been able to sing God's praises. Now we look unto His Word, thinking a bit, like I said, about 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 9. In particular, the Lord knows how to deliver the righteous. That is the theme of what we're going to be talking about. The Lord knows how to deliver the righteous. He means us. He knows. Well, let's talk about a little bit about what we know, though, however. What we know is largely based in experience, the experiences we've had, the experiences in which we really have and we really don't even consider. Sometimes it's the experiences and the manner in which we live that really we don't examine until we are living a different way. And then we realize, that's quite different. As you might can tell from my accent, I wasn't born here, although I'm Essex now. I live here. This is home. But there's one thing that I do here. This may sound silly, but I didn't do a whole lot where I was brought up. That is walk. I mean, walk from place to place. Walking mildly great distances for me. There's one thing about walking is that it really gives you the time to consider. It really helps you to slow down and say, I've never noticed that before. What do they do there? What's in this place? What was that in times past? Look at the bird over there. What type of bird is that? All of these things that you do when you're walking is actually quite wonderful. But it's one thing when you're accustomed to doing something, like driving from place to place, for instance, in lieu of walking, you may never know what you're really missing. You may just think that this is a very normal part of life, and this is how you get from A to B or B to C. Right? You're not missing anything. People find this all the time when they begin something called a New Year's resolution, or they start their diet and exercise program, and they start those things that last only a few moments or days, or maybe they were just a good idea in the mind, and that's about as far as they got. I say that tongue-in-cheek, but no, in general, people do like to begin something new in this time. And so a lot of times that revolves around food. I'm going to eat this way. I'm going to have a Mediterranean diet. And then they become sort of these spokespeople for the way they live or the food in which they are eating. They're saying, I feel so much better. You ought to try it. Have you ever met anybody like that? They try to convince you that this is going so well that it would go well for you? Yeah, well, most of you probably have, even if you're not nodding at me. It's okay. It's at the evening. I'll get you woken up in a minute. But this way of life, it's all based on experience. But what's quite interesting is the experience does not give us the lens or the sight to be able to see things from God's perspective. I mean the world. I mean the life in which we live. And so Peter really is trying, He's drawing a heavy, underlined pen marking on the fact that if you want to know what life is, if you want to know what life is from God's perspective, what it really means to live in this world, here it is. And so that's what we're going to be talking about in our understanding of this world and the life that we live in it. So we talk about experiences, but what we need to do now, though, is to understand the life that we live in this world. We need to interpret our experience in the light of Jesus Christ and His actions, His work in us. Because what happened, and I'm going to preach the gospel, I'm going to speak about the gospel throughout, but this is not going to be at the end of the sermon. the gospel is actually the foundation of how we see the life that we live and the life that we live in this world. You see, because we were blind, it says in the scriptures, we were without knowledge. We were lost. We were kind of groping around the wall looking for the door, so to speak. We really couldn't see the big picture of what's going on in this life. Even if we thought we could, we thought it must be so complicated. Who could really get this right? Who could really live properly in this world? Who can have the proper understanding of what's going on here? And what has happened is Peter is giving us this right view of the world, this right view of the life in which you now live through Jesus Christ, because the experience that we now have to be able to live in the world is given to us because He has experienced this world for us. And that's why the incarnation, the coming of Jesus, what we celebrate at Christmas, is absolutely foundational. Because He experienced this life. He lived this life in this world so that you and I could live in a life and in a world that is to come. Are you following me? That's the way and the lens in which we're going to look at this. Our text talks about the world. There's some defining that needs to happen, because what is the world? Is it the Earthrise that you see from the satellite cameras or from the moon missions? Is it that bluish ball with the green spots on it? Is that the world? Well, yes, it is. It's the world, because the world is actually everything around us. It's everything that has been created by God. But how does Peter, and how do you need to understand what the word world means here? Well, the word world, it actually has had a connotation to it. Because in its beginnings, this word meant something like an adornment, a beautiful adornment to be added to the beauty of the one who wears it. Like a bride wearing a beautiful gown or an heirloom necklace. That's the way in the ancient world you could have interpreted it. But it was a condition that showed there was order, that there is beauty. But you see, that word world has changed. Because the world lost its order. It lost its beauty and its adornment, its original created reason, because of sin. Because of the fall, because of the condition in which we now find the world in. So in defining world, it is this thing in which we all live. It is everything that belongs to it, but it is specifically talking about that is found here. That was too many that's and too many is's, but it's that which is hostile to God, underlined. It's that which is hostile to God. That's the world that Peter's talking about. Does anybody live in a world that seems hostile to God and His ways? It seems like that's the majority of what we find in the world. And so Peter is specifically talking about that which is hostile to God, the world and His people which are hostile to God, because it is it has fallen from its original created order to be an adornment or a condition of orderliness. And it underlines the simple and yet sharp distinction of how God views the people that live in this world. And here's the nub of what we're getting to. It's very simple. It's not complicated. And it gives you an inside view, if you will, because of this word and how it enters into your heart and your understanding of the way God sees the world. He says this in James 4, chapter 4, verse 4. He says, let me tell you this. Friendship, it's an important concept, right? But friendship with this world meaning those who are at enmity with God, those who are hostile to God, what does that make us? Make anyone who is a friend to them. It puts enmity between God and those people. Because that enmity, that word just meaning enemy, if we are friends with this world, it excludes us from being friends with God. And so God has a distinction, a clear distinction. There are those who are His friends, and those who are His enemies. I told you this was simple. And that's the heavenly view, the downward view that God gives us of how He views the world. Those who are His friends and those who are His enemies. Very simple. And you can notice when those who we think might be His friends, when they begin to live a life that looks a whole lot more like the way His enemies would look. James says that they become what he calls double-minded. You can't live in both of those places at one time. You become unstable in all your ways. You can't be two men at once. You cannot be an enemy and a friend. You are either one or the other. And that is the simple truth that he's bringing about. And so we are being called to live a life and walk in a manner to show that you live here in this world, but you know where your home is. You live here, and yet you know that you belong to the one who owns all. You are not His enemy, but you have been called His friend. And so as you walk in this world, you demonstrate that is where your home is. You demonstrate that in all of life. You know, I have a cat that I've mentioned several times. And, sometimes I want to take Essex's collar off because for this reason. If Essex were to, let's say, escape and go outside, which no one tell this and we're not being recorded, he did this afternoon. So I have no idea what he's up to at the moment. But if he were to go outside and he were not to have a collar and he were to, say, cause trouble in someone else's home, one of my neighbors, then they wouldn't know who the cat belongs to. But because he has my name printed in brass around his neck, my telephone number, they know who to call. Because they're quite aware, oh, this is Ben's cat. Again. So, what if we were to walk around and people were able to truly see, oh, that's God's friend. That's God's friend. He, she, they belong to Him. But wait a minute. Why are they doing that? Why are they living this way? Why are they walking there? Why are they saying that? Why are they watching that? If they truly belong to Him. That doesn't make any sense. Just food for thought. Basically, what I want you to consider as we consider a fairly heavy passage is, have we lost the clear distinctions that God has given us in His Word, the clear distinction, friend and enemy, have we lost those clear distinctions in our heart? Have we lost the clear distinction that we should have in knowing Christ? Have we lost a manner of life, a manner of walking that is worthy of the King who has called us? Have we lost the distinction that we have of those who are saved by grace, not by works, lest any man should boast? Do you remember Jesus telling a parable? And he speaks, and he tells a parable of one who is in great debt. And he's forgiven of this debt that he could never pay. And what does he do? He goes off and he forgives all the debts of the people that owed him money because of how wonderful and how much he had been forgiven. No. He goes and says, your debts are now come due, and if you can't pay, I've got a nice hideaway with your name on it. I've got a nice prison where you can serve your sentence. And what happens is the king, he realizes this man has been forgiven so much. He has now gone and demanded that these debtors who owed him very little, that they pay up. And what happens next is the condition of the man who was forgiven, it ended up being much worse than the condition he was in at first. He didn't realize how much he had been forgiven. He didn't realize, he didn't understand, he didn't comprehend the greatness of what he had been given. And so he lost the clear distinction that he should have. He lost the clear distinction of what it meant to walk in a manner worthy of the way he had been treated, of the goodness that he had been given, of the forgiveness that he had received. So 3 things about this particular verse and how it relates to the ability, the knowledge, the hope that we have that God will rescue the righteous, but also that he will keep judgment. 3 things. The first part, as you can see this directly in the verse, the first part is that God knows. How does it say in the verse? It begins in verse 9. Again, it says, "Then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly." He knows. He knows how to rescue. How does he know? It's because he's sovereign. It's because he's good. It's because no one and nothing falls outside of his purview, outside of his rule, outside of his reign. You know this. He is the King of Kings for a reason. Because he is able and he is great and greatly to be praised. And so when it comes to his people, he knows how to deliver them. But not only does he know how, he's able to deliver them because of his sovereign rule. What shows us this in the context? Well, one of the stories of the 3 that's been mentioned is we have this little just a picture from the story of Lot, right? Lot and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And for those of you who have come to small groups, you've seen this passage a lot, and you're ready to leave this passage behind, I'm sure, after the last couple weeks. But we've learned a lot from it, haven't we? We've asked a lot of good questions about it. But what happens is some very interesting wording from Abraham in that particular story as he's pleading for Lot, who lived in Sodom and Gomorrah. Do you realize that his pleading was directly a pleading for his family that lived in Sodom and Gomorrah? There's a direct correlation here. And so Abraham pleads for this city which was wiped from the face of the earth. How does he plead? What does he say? He says, will you, he's speaking to the Lord, he says, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? will you just sweep them away? Would you do that? The answer is a resounding no. Abraham knows it's a resounding no, because the Lord knows how to deliver the righteous. Abraham says, far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked. You know how to deliver them, Lord, so that the righteous suffer as the wicked. And then he gives one of the greatest statements in the Scriptures concerning God's kingship and his rule. He says, shall not the judge who is over all the earth, shall he not do right? Do you believe that in this life and in this time, that the judge of all the earth, with all the things that are going on in this world, with all the questions that you may have, how's this one going to get resolved? Maybe that's your heart before the Lord tonight. I don't know how God could do this. Can God do this? Abraham says, shall not the judge of all the earth do right? In the midst of a wicked, and in the midst of a generation who did not believe, in the midst of a generation that laughed when they were given the opportunity even to run from destruction. You know, Sodom and Gomorrah, and even the generation of the floods of Noah, it is seen as a picture of what it means to live in the generation, in the times coming before his judgment, the great judgment at the end of the days, right? And so that's why Peter is bringing our minds back to these narratives from the book of Genesis, because they're used throughout the Scripture to bring this home, to bring this back to us, for us to understand what is happening, and then for us to be encouraged by the fact that this isn't something new. This isn't a new program that God has to initiate where he has never done anything like this in the history of the world. No, it says, hey, church, people who belong to Jesus, people who are going through some really difficult, some times in which there is an extreme amount of pressure. People, when you don't see how the end of this is going to look, because none of the options look good. People who live in the midst of mourning, people who live in the midst of violence, in the shadow of war even. How do you give hope to them? How does this make a hill of beans a difference to them tonight? They might not be able to hear me, but this word continues to echo across this globe. And it will be heard. And it will prove that God is able. He is able to rescue. And he knows how to deliver. And we will see it. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, in the scale in which you would imagine. But he will do it. Just see, just wait. So we have this example from Abraham, and we see that God is sovereign over evil. And we may say, why not wipe away? Why not make things clean? Wasn't this a good idea? Well, because of his love, that he has not wiped away everything. He is merciful. You know, so oftentimes we talk about the things in which we do, the things that are wrong, the things that make us enemies with God unless we know him. We talk about them externals, like a list of things, and yet we try to detach them from our person. And yet we see scripturally that it is not that we do things that are sinful, is that we ourselves are sinful. And so if God were to wipe away and to make everything clean, where would that leave us? And so he is slow, he is compassionate. How many times throughout the scriptures has that not been his mantra? I am a God, slow and compassionate. And in this passage to come, we will talk about a God who is slow and compassionate, not willing that any should perish, but all should come to repentance. Talk about strong words. Loving, merciful, because he knows he is sovereign over all. Second thing, he is able to rescue. He is able to rescue. He rescues from trials. What does it mean to be rescued from a trial? Well, normally, what that means is that you're tempted to steal, you're tempted to sin. I was going to take a flower, but I think they're all together. And so God rescues you from a temptation. We tend to conflate those two ideas. But here, when he's talking about he's able to rescue you from a trial, what he's describing is he's able to deliver you, wait for it, from calamity and affliction. That's what he's talking about. He is able to rescue you in the dark day. In the day when it seems that evil has gotten the upper hand and all will be lost. When calamity seems to come in like a flood, he can and will deliver. What does it mean to rescue? Well, funny enough, do you remember the story of Lot and the angels, the men who rescued him? What'd they do? They say, oh, come on, Lot, follow us. The day got late, the hour got late, and they said, all right, Lot, we're leaving. Grabs him, and they take him out, is what the word actually means. They take him out. So God is saying here, I'm able to rescue you, meaning I'm able to grab you underneath the arms, scoop you up, and take you out. I'm able to deliver you, is the way in which it is spoken of here. You're carried by the arms, carried by the Almighty. What happened to Noah? Was he just told, you're going to be fine? Was he just left to go his own way? Go build a boat and continue to float until the flood is over? Continue to go until you see dry land? No, what happened is God told him exactly what to do. He told him, build the ark. Guess what? When it was built, he gathered unto him the animals. And guess what he also did? It said God himself shut him in. He knows how to deliver and how to rescue those from affliction. Shall he not do the same for those who cry unto him? So he knows how to rescue. I'll pass on that and we'll just go to the third point. There's a little bit more that we can talk about because there's so much in this passage that's actually encouraging to the life of the believer. But the third is that secondly, he rescues, and thirdly, he knows how to keep the unrighteous, even in the final evil days before his coming. And you say, how in the world are you going to make a positive out of that? How in the world are you going to help us to understand that in a way that makes a difference in how we see the world? It's actually because of the way that he describes what's going on here. Because in verse 9, as we continue to go back to it, it says, and he knows how to rescue the godly from trials and to keep the unrighteous under punishment. That's one word, until the day of judgment. That's a very rare word. It's actually only seen here in this form. He knows how to keep the unrighteous, the enemies of God, under punishment until the day comes. And what it actually means is he set boundaries. God has set boundaries upon the wickedness of this world. Wickedness is not running unchecked, unknown by our sovereign King. It may seem like this world is absolutely frazzled, which it is, but it has not taken him by surprise, nor is it outside of his control. He has set bounds, and he has began, and he has continued to set those bounds even in the ancient days. And what he's saying, when the angels rebelled, I wasn't powerless to do anything, but I bound them. The word chain there is the word for binding someone. I bound them until the judgment comes. The Apostle Paul says, do you not know, will you not be ignorant that you will judge the angels? You, meaning the Christians, you will be there in God's economy because he's made this sharp distinction about who the Christian is in this world. They are the ones who will be with him in the judgment. They are the ones who will see final judgment done, accomplished, spoken over. Those that God has contained or bound, limited, even since the beginning of the world. And he's done this limiting, he's done this mitigating, he's worked in such a way. Why? Because he's slow to anger, and he's merciful, and he's given time so that those may come to him, those may hear and believe. So how do we kind of wrap this up? How do we understand what's going on here? We get a picture of the heart of God. Do you realize that law, do you realize that even governmental law, that order, that the ability to arbitrate, all this we see because of what God has put in place. Even the things that we never considered to give him thanks for. Yet, it's not a perfect order. But we look forward to a time in which a perfect order would be restored and Eden would once again flourish and grow in God's garden. That will happen when he comes again. But one last reminder, one last thought about this. We've made a clear distinction between those who are God's friends and those who are God's enemies. The Scriptures have done that for us. The Scriptures have given us this view, very clearly delineates the two differences. What do we do about those who live in the world that don't know him? Those who live in the world that are God's enemies. How do we as Christians think about that in these times? How do we show compassion and kindness? What do we do about it? It reminds me in the Two Towers, in Tolkien's work, The Two Towers, and basically the goodies, the elves, they have this option because they can just sail away from a world that is falling apart. The race of men will fall, it has been said. The war will destroy Middle Earth. And there's this famous line, and it says, shall we leave men to their fate? Shall we leave men to their fate? And the answer is absolutely not, if we were to take that into our own words. And in fact, Jude does something, because if you haven't noticed, Jude and 2 Peter have a lot of overlap in their content. And Jude gives a great encouragement and a great example of how we are to respond to this type of teaching, and when we understand God's position as sovereign king. What does he tell us? He tells us to keep yourselves in the love of God, Christians. waiting for the mercy of our Lord Jesus Christ that leads to eternal life. Now what does he say? What does he say that you need to take with you this week wherever you go? And you need to consider when your heart is burdened, when it burns inside of you because of what you have heard, because you know they are exhibiting right now the fact that they do not stay. They aren't found in this camp over here. They're not found in the ones who are friends with God, but they show themselves to be enemies of Him. And when your heart burns over that understanding for your loved one or your neighbor, your coworker, Jude says, have mercy upon those who doubt. That's the first step. Have mercy upon those who doubt. Continue to reach out to them. You have what makes you distinct and different. What makes you a friend of God is the gospel of Jesus Christ. What makes you thus is Him. And so reach out to those who have doubt. In the second place, save others. Literally, Jude says, sometimes what you need to do is run in, wrap your arms around them, and extremely, you are saving them. You're snatching them away from what they will experience coming. God may be calling you to do as He does. You cannot save them in a sense of their immortal soul. God is the one who saves. God is the one who regenerates. But you can lie down in front of them and say, I know where you're heading. I know where you're heading if you continue this way. You will not be a friend of God, but you will be His enemy. And from that place, there is no return. If you step over me, then you may continue in that way. But I will continue to weep, and I will continue to hold out my hands for you. It is that big of a deal. It is life and death. And lastly, he says, show mercy with fear, hating even the garment stained by the flesh. When you show mercy, when you act in this manner, be fearful. Be, another word, reverent, close to the Lord, holding out His word. Because when you hold out His word and His standards, and yet you have denied, you have held back, you have not followed, how can you hold out truth and hope in this manner? How can you show them Christ with the way that you've been dressed? How can you show them Christ with the distinctions that you have lost? How can you show them Christ when the world has been far more interesting and lovely than Him? He says, with fear, do this. There is hope, even in the midst of a world that seems hopeless. But what we need right now, and I pray what we've been given, is this sight of this world from God's perspective. Through the pen of Peter, read to us tonight. May you be encouraged. May you come to Him and bow down and worship and say, worthy are you to be honored and gloried in and praised. Because this is going to be our posture, not only now, but for all eternity. Because with Him we will be. That's a promise if we belong to Him. Let's pray.